Welcome to the Breakout Growth Podcast, where Sean, Ellis, and Ethan Garr interview leaders from the world's fastest growing companies to get to the heart of what's really driving their growth. And now, here are your hosts, Sean Ellis and Ethan Garr.
All right, in this week's episode of the Breakout Growth Podcast, Ethan Garr and I chat with Justin Kistner, the founder of CopyClub.ai and CopySub, two startups that train individuals and teams to use AI to supercharge content creation. So for growth leaders, AI isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's not just part of the tool set. It's actually becoming a part of our mindset. So we want to bring Justin in to do a deep dive into how growth professionals should really be thinking about using AI to win. So Ethan, what stood out for you?
Oh man, I probably the thing that stood out most for me that I loved was when Justin describes AI as he humanizes it, and he says it's more like a new team member fresh out of college than a senior colleague, and he explains why that matters.
That was one of my aha moments.
It's like how do I talk to someone new who doesn't have context, who I need to be specific with, versus someone who knows everything about the company already. That was really interesting, and I thought from there it sort of led into the importance of context. And Justin he shared this idea of the context library and how you build this context library for ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and how that it then can use that to help you get what you want out of it. So I think whether you're just scratching the surface and bouncing off, ideas off of ChatGPT and Claude, or you're going deep and finding these nuanced tools, some of which he talks about, to get really specific outcomes to, drive and build your business, there's probably something in this discussion that you'll be able to take and use immediately. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's clear from the conversation that Justin can nerd out on this stuff. He can go
for sure
really deep and probably lose a bit of the audience if we let him go too far down there. And there's probably some of the audience that's maybe right there with him. But we tried to make this one for everyone and just make it a lot less daunting to bring AI into your workflow. So there are a ton of nuanced tools out there, and there's so much you can do with AI. But to really get the outcomes you need as a growth leader, we wanted to work with Justin to get kind of an understanding of how ChatGPT or Claude or how these tools really think. And I think that's gonna help you get more value out of them. So I personally am using ChatGPT upwards of 20 hours a week. So kind of everything I do, I'm bouncing ideas off of ChatGPT. Tapping into books that I've read in the past. How do I do this? How do I do that? Tapping into experts. And but as I talked with Justin here, so many new ideas for getting value, even more value from AI emerged for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's so neat how Justin explains that AI is not going to be a replacement for your skills, right? It's a way to make your skills better. And I think for you and I, that's what we're trying to get out of it. But like you said, fundamentally understanding how it thinks is how you're going to get the most out of it, how you're going to make it, give you the productivity and value you're looking for. So I think the important thing for growth people is to talk about how they're using AI every day. Think about how you're finding innovative ways to prompt it and use it so that you can achieve outcomes with it that you're looking for. So I think it's amazing. And it was just so neat to kind of dig deep into that with Justin.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you and I have been doing that for a while where when we have a prompt that gives us a really helpful result back, we get excited and we share that with each other. And I know for me personally, so much of figuring out, how to push the envelope with ChatGPT is just like my own curious drive, my own curiosity. Could it do this? Let me try uploading a CSV. Wow, this is great. I've done some posts on Substack about how I can analyze the product market fit test using ChatGPT. But every day I come up with new and better use cases for it, and so I know this one's a little different than what a lot of our interviews are. But I think that our audience will get a lot from this, and it's fun to mix it up a bit.
It sure is. It's funny, you're talking about us sending back information. We're texting each other with how we prompted. We probably just let on to our audience just what dorks we are. But regardless, this is Probably. Yeah. So this is a fun one. Yeah, I'm excited to jump in with Justin, and to everyone, Happy New Year. Enjoy.
Yeah. Happy New Year, everyone. All right, let's go. Hey, Justin, welcome to the Breakout Growth Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, it is awesome to see you too. Joined, of course, by Ethan Garr, co-host on the podcast. Hey, Ethan.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Justin. Good to see both of you.
Yeah. So Justin, last time we spent, or maybe I don't even remember how long ago it was, but we spent quite a bit of time together on an earlier startup you were working on, and
Right.
now you're going in a very different direction as the founder of CopyClub.ai and CopySub. So I would love to hear what led to this direction, and this one obviously leans a lot into AI. So maybe you can both kind of talk about why you're excited about AI and give us a quick introduction to Copy Club and CopySub.
For sure. So, that previous startup, UpFocus, was, man, if I'd have started that now with AI, I could do it all over so differently. But yeah, essentially, raise some capital. Was awesome to have you as an advisor, and then was going to raise capital in June of 2022 when the market just dried up. And if you weren't already somebody's sunk cost, it was pretty hard to raise capital at that time. But I was like, well, I'm just going to leverage my content marketing skills, and because I had total cost control, why don't I just build up the domain into something that is useful, and then I can turn around and have that as an asset to either raise money off of or to sell. Then shortly after that is when ChatGPT 3.5 really hit the market. And I was like, oh, well, let me see if I can start to use this. And of course, like most people, at first it was just like, whoa, look at this magic. Then you start to read it and you're like, wait a minute, this is terrible quality. This article doesn't really say anything.
Every article starts with "in a world."
Let's delve in. Embark on the tapestry. So I was like, well, I wonder if what I could do is, instead of just asking it to write the article, why don't I just leverage a developmental writing technique? Research the topic, create the outline, write it in chunks, do some editing, just leverage AI as part of that process. So that's what really started to send me deep down the rabbit hole. And then as I started to tell some of my friends what I was doing, they were like, hey, actually, I have customers that we do content for, can we hire you? So I was like, all right, I need to make some money while I'm figuring out how to continue bootstrapping the startup. Then pretty soon I started to get a lot of business, and I had then read about the founder of Design Joy, which is a subscription-based design service. Okay. I was like, I wonder if I could do the same thing but for content. And so that classic, spent 2 days, made a website, launched CopySub, and then within just a couple months, I was able to grow to 18K MRR. Wow. I was like, oh, it looks like this is the horse I'm now riding.
Nice.
And then as I started to go to market with that, what was the real differentiator was that we were leveraging a heavy human in the loop process to solve for the quality problems of AI.
Awesome. Okay.
But leveraging AI to solve for the scale problems of just human only. People were like, well, that's great. Can you just teach me how to do what you're doing? So then that led to creating CopyClub.ai, which is all about helping people figure out how to leverage AI, in a community-based environment where we do like mastermind style, we call them quests, where we go off and build AI agents and then also help them figure out how do you prompt, and like what tools should you use, and what are the best practices and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of the genesis of those companies, and how I ended up making that pivot and what they do.
So it's It's cool because at some point you and I just caught up, and somehow we went down this rabbit hole or tangent on AI. And by the end of this conversation, I was like rage typing Sean. I'm like, this is incredible. Like, you can't believe what I just learned. And like, it was just, you really opened my eyes to just how to really think about AI and how you can use it and how you can leverage it. And that's why I was excited to bring you on the podcast, because, stepping back a little bit from the content focus of Copy Club and CopySub, what I really was hoping you could tell us a little bit about is just more broadly, what do you feel like individuals and teams that are really focused on growth need to know, need to do, need to think about when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons I was saying, man, I wish I had started up Focus in the AI era, is it really is about, you have a ton more team members now. And you have to have a mental shift from being the individual contributor to being the manager of the individual contributors. And that works best when you have expertise in a topic area. So as an example, one of the things that I have done, and by the way, happy to share this as a free resource, is I was like, well, I can take the product market fit survey and now I can automatically process the results, which was like the number one complaint that I got when we were working on UpFocus.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got to go through and manually tag all this. And so now you can use really good quality prompts to extrapolate out those insights from those surveys. And then you can start to do things like, okay, now given this knowledge, let's turn these into job statements or outcome statements. Let's start to, now that we have that, use that as the context for ideating what our landing page copy should be. And so all of a sudden, if you have these skills, how can you start to shift the way that you work to being directive of the work? And you still need that good expertise to know what's the right way to ask the work to get done, what's the right context to provide, and most importantly, how do you evaluate the output so that you can refine it? So it's not a replacement for skill. Like, you still need to have that skill, but it is a augmentation of your team.
Yeah, it gets you there a heck of a lot faster. I remember the first time that I uploaded a CSV of the survey results, and just like, I'd never uploaded a CSV into ChatGPT before, and then I just started firing some questions off, what is the primary benefit, and then it would give me the average primary benefit.
Right.
But then I'm like, well, wait, do it the Sean Ellis way. So I'm telling ChatGPT to using my name in the third person, which is a little weird, but then
that's how you talk to me every time we talk.
and my kids. But anyway, saying, oh, well, how would Sean Ellis figure out what the primary benefit is? Oh, Sean would run a filter to only look at feedback from the people who'd be very disappointed without your product, and I just started hammering more and more questions at it, and okay, how can I enhance my product roadmap based on this? And just so many actionable outputs. And I ended up actually publishing that whole thread on my blog on Substack, just to kind of share ways other people could use it. Yeah.
That I pick up a few prompt ideas there. In that same vein, once you have that consolidated information, which I know this is something we're going to talk about, that curated result after you've done that analysis, that's now something that we call it a context library that you just have at the ready. We call it prompt ready information that you need anytime you're wanting to, AI is super smart, but it always has amnesia. So you have to load up into its RAM again. Who are we? What are we doing? Who's my customer? But now you can start to do things like, hey, given that we know this is our primary benefit, go look at my homepage and give me a critique of how in alignment or not my content
Yeah,
is with this. You know,
Perfect.
what gaps? How might I change this? You know, kind of getting that like 360 perspective is, to use a overly used AI expression, it's a game changer.
Yeah. One thing I have found though is that like if I don't, and maybe like, I think you have some of the best things I learned to do with AI was after Ethan talked to you and he said like Justin said do it this way. So I'm definitely kind of playing this back to you as more of a question. But I find like when you ask it to do something in general, it kind of takes the average of all knowledge on how to do it. And like for example, a North Star metric, and then there's so many different definitions of what a North Star metric is that the output usually isn't that good. So that's where I will ask it. If Andrew Chen were to look at this viral loop, how would he recommend I improve it? So that it kind of consolidates on the expertise of someone who I really trust in that area. What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, that is spot on. In fact, I have a thing I call the prompt evaluation prompt, which what it looks for is, and I had to like go into the world of linguistics to try to be very precise about it. It looks for what are called unspecified nouns. Mm-hmm. And so an unspecified noun is like my project. What's your project? I don't know what your project is. Or North Star metric is, on the verge of being a unspecified noun because it's broadly interpretable. And so it really is about being specific in what you are asking, and not one of the ways, Ethan, we've talked about this is if you're used to talking to senior colleagues who are highly competent, you're probably bad at prompting because the way you talk to senior colleagues is you would say things like, create a content calendar for me. And you're expecting that senior colleague has all kinds of expertise plus context on you and the company that they're bringing to bear. You have to actually act like this is somebody fresh out of college, not a senior colleague. And then what would you tell them? So your example of specifying what you mean by North Star metric or whose interpretation of it is exactly how you get better results.
It's funny you say that because someone I'm working with, he was saying to me just recently, he's like, why can't we just take all of our data, give it to ChatGPT or some tool and say, find us the important trends to help grow our business? And I think it's like what you just described is like, because
a bunch of unspecified nouns.
the senior colleague understands the nuance of the business. The fresh out of college example that you're giving doesn't. So you have to walk it through those paces to get it to give you that feedback. And I think that's really important. I want to jump back to something you mentioned. So you and I have been talking to one of my clients. They're creating essentially trivia game style learning content. One of the key questions was like, hey, could we use AI to effectively do this? Because they were really struggling. It was like, we want to use AI, but every time we couldn't get the style right, the tone right. We couldn't get it to, bring images in appropriately. And, I came to you and you're like, yes, we can do this. But a big part of it is like, we have to set up the context library, which you mentioned. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more context about what a context library is and how it works and why teams need to think about their context library to really drive outcomes with AI.
Yeah. So I'll first just say where the idea of the context library came from. And that was when we were creating articles for CopySub customers. We experience what many people who first start using AI experience, which is if you start to ask it for ideas for articles that would apply to your business, it just tends to do a pretty vague, high level job, or the average sort of view. But the more you can tell it, wait, hold on, here is about my company, here is my ideal customer profile, here is their pain points, this is why they buy from us. And the more you have that information in a well described and concise format, then when you go to ask for ideas, you get really great stuff. And so that's when we started realizing, as part of our onboarding, we're going to, instead of every time we need to supply that information, we have to like root around the website to find their products and like copy and paste and then hope that the marketing description of the product was clear enough to guide the AI. Instead, we go through this process of figuring out, who are your customers, what's your market, who are your competitors, how do you describe your company, what's the product offerings, and all of that gets saved into what used to be just like a Google Doc, but now it's a series of markdown files. And then anytime we go to create things, we're able to pull in that context really quickly. So in this case, for your client, what was particularly important is that there is a school of thought around how the questions that they're asking need to be. And there's different schools of thought that could apply. And so how do we make sure that the AI understands what is our school of thought on the training and what makes good questions, what makes bad questions, and how do we have all of that at the ready so that when we ask for it to help us with thinking of new games, that it's doing it mindful of what we mean.
Right.
So that's, you can think about context library as anything where you need it to have clarity on what you mean by something, then that's something that you should have at the ready so that when you're working in AI and doing all kinds of other ad hoc prompting, that you're able to just pull that in really easily.
How do you actually pull it in?
Yeah, so my usage has kind of evolved. And one of the things we use now is we use IDE tools, so integrated developer environment. So like Cursor, one I'm using now is called Zed, and they're meant for developers to write code. But the user experience for them happens to lend itself really well to a text-based workflow. And so with almost all of these, Windsurf is another one. A lot of them are derivatives of VS Code. They'll have your file structure over here. So we'll have a folder literally called context library, and then we'll have like about, market, company profile, customer profile, competitors. Like each of those will be their own markdown file, plain text, if you will.
Yeah.
And then when we're on the right side, you'll have an AI chat that's part of the overall window, and in the middle is the document that you're working on.
Okay. So you're essentially attaching a document, or you just URL that links to it?
Yep, you use like an @ message in Cursor, so it's like @ mentioning a file. You can also just like drag the file over, and so therefore you can just very quickly pull it in instead of like if you're just using the ChatGPT UI.
Yeah, you
can attach documents and stuff, but it's just cumbersome enough that it's annoying.
Would you say that like average growth people who may not be like super technical, may not have an engineering background, can pretty quickly figure this out? Like if they take a product like Cursor, they can figure it out, or is it?
I definitely think that the sequence of events is that you should just first get used to the idea of good prompting. And good prompting is that you are specific about what you're looking for, and that you're providing context. There's a lot of frameworks out there, like one of the ones that's pretty commonly used in interviewing, the STAR framework, situation, task, action, result. That's a good way of making sure, was I clear? Did I explain the context? And then, so get used to just prompting that way and seeing how it improves the quality of the response. Then get used to the idea of like attaching, like you can we started when we were using context libraries as just one singular Google Doc. And And then eventually they became big enough that we were like, well, I want to slice and dice these. But just start with like one doc and then just get used to attaching that every time you're doing it. And once you feel the pain of that, then like take a look at something like Cursor, and all you do is just open up a folder just like you would anywhere on your computer, and then you have the files in there, and then you might have to watch a tutorial because the UI does look a little engineery, but I think it's pretty straightforward in how you use it for creating content.
Very
I
cool.
would start there.
Yeah, start with the prompts.
Yeah.
So, and then, one of the things you mentioned is, ChatGPT has amnesia, and so, like, I've always been under the impression that, like, as long as that it tells you your memory's full, and then you can kind of get rid of the football scores or some other like irrelevant stuff from it. But
Yeah.
it is funny how it definitely, you would think it would be kind of have the context to not have to do that each time, but it doesn't. Each time it seems like I've got to add the context again.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is they obviously have the memory feature. The major problem with the memory feature is that it's a bit black box in how it operates. Like you don't really know why it chooses to save what it chooses to save, and you don't know why or how it chooses to invoke the usage of that memory. And so I think this is a temporary need for users to have to be good at. But that's why I prefer a curated context library that I know how to browse as a human and pull in manually. But I definitely think something measured in not very many years, we won't be doing that because it'll be just more efficient. The systems will get good enough that we don't need to do that.
One of the things that I've found is that, like, I actually find it really useful just to say, hey, I have this type of business. I have an activation challenge. Give me 10 ideas of tests I could run for activation, and give as much context as I can. Yeah. But then following up with a question of what other insights could I give you to improve the quality of these ideas? So you even in kind of generating the ideas for other contexts, ChatGPT can be helpful.
Yeah, so that's going to make me nerd out. One of the things that I've been getting into lately is, of course, I had to get a subscription, the $200 a month subscription to Leverage 01 Pro. And what inspired me is I saw this Twitter thread where somebody had got the subscription like very early and was asking users, hey, give me what you think are really good prompts that would really leverage what 01 Pro can do. And some of these questions were so smart. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought to ask that type of question. So what I did is I then saved all of those. And then this is sort of building off of what you were saying of, like, essentially asking it to help you. The thing I started to do was like, look at the way these questions are structured. Here's what I'm trying to do. How could I ask a question like that with what I'm trying to do? Then I use that prompt in 01 Pro, where it has like deeper nested reasoning capabilities. And man, I've been getting some really impressive results.
Awesome.
Yeah. The way I describe it is, I've had people who are like, oh, I used 01 Pro and I wasn't that impressed. I was like, well, what did you ask it? And they would give me this like really simple prompt. I'm like, well, think about 01 Pro as like it's capable of lifting 2,000 pounds, and you asked it to lift 50 pounds and you weren't that impressed.
Right.
And I'm telling you, you probably don't even know how to ask 1,000-pound questions. Like, you have to think like, what would a PhD student or a data scientist ask, and how would they ask it? And that's the type of stuff that, when you can structure your questions in those ways, that you get really impressed with these reasoning capabilities.
Awesome.
Go ahead, John. Thank you. So I'm just curious, like, with all this information that you might feed into a context library, do companies need to be concerned about the data that they are providing to these services? And like, is there a risk that like that become like, hey, I just gave away all of my
Coca-Cola's formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I should ask that in the third person, Sean.
I would probably swap the word with concerned with mindful. Companies need to be mindful of what they're doing. I actually happen to be helping an agency right now with their AI policy, so this is extremely top of mind. So one of the things that you should be mindful of is whether or not your data could be used in future training data. So like if you have a consumer ChatGPT account and you're using it through the UI, by default, the settings are that you are opted into that data is allowed to be used in future training data. Now, you can go into your privacy settings and you can uncheck that option so that it's not used in future training data. Now, there's a difference between that and whether or not it's still subject to human review. Sometimes that human review is triggered because like they have some safety review mechanism in place, and then that causes a human to review it. And then you also have to think about things like data retention, because people get hacked. We see it all the time. And so maybe the company's policy is that they're not going to have a human review it and it's not going to be used in future training data, but a hacker was able to break in, and since it was stored on their servers, they got your data. So being mindful of it means that if you understand what and you have to think about your own data in sort of tiers of sensitivity. There's obviously publicly available information. Who cares? And then you have stuff that might be private, but not necessarily sensitive. Like maybe you have templates that you use internally to help you with creating content. You don't necessarily want to post those publicly, but it's not like your sensitive information, like, your
quarterly results or something before it hits the market.
Exactly. And so there's an element of trust. Obviously many of these companies are involved in multiple legal battles around whether or not they violated copyright. So how do you trust a company who's already demonstrated maybe a behavior that is not trustworthy? Not that I necessarily think that. I'm just saying that's part
There's
of the ethos
out there. Yeah.
And so one of the things I started to do too is really get into the world of local LLMs, and especially with like Llama, when Llama 3.1 came out and offered a 405 billion parameter model that essentially is frontier level, like a Chat GPT 4.0. And a couple things about that is that means that you could stuff that you wouldn't necessarily put into a cloud-based LLM, you might feel comfortable putting into a local model. And especially to maybe like redact it in such a way that allows you to then put it into.
Yeah. That's what I do a lot of times. If I'm doing survey, I'll obscure the company name and then remove all personally identifiable information. And so now it's just like company X. What is that? I'll ask all the questions as
right.
I know what company X is, but now the system doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And so then you can even do things like if you're manually doing that, that's one level. But if you're using like a local LLM, then when you supply it in, when it comes back, you can unredact it. And then might be useful for if you're drilling down on specific customers or whatnot. One thing I'll say, just because I did mention the 405 billion parameter model, that's not going to run on your laptop. That thing requires like 400 gigs of RAM, which you're not even going to get that off of most standard computers, even if you were, getting into the world of like gaming PCs. Like you pretty much for that level are going to need something like a rack-mounted server. So you're looking at decent 10 to 20K type investment of hardware, but you can get some smaller models like 7 billion parameter models that can run on your laptop and are more than sufficient for certainly doing like redacting tasks and basic tasks. But the more sophisticated the output you need, the more you're going to need something like frontier level. So I could certainly see big companies, companies who have the budget that like buying a $20,000 machine so that they could have the ability to process sensitive data is within the budget. So companies who have that kind of data and that kind of budget may want to think about having local LLMs that they use for data they don't feel comfortable putting in the cloud.
Yeah. So obviously, like you're so kind of deep into this now. I'm curious, like what's your recommendation? Like should startups in particular, they're trying to get their product right for their customers. They're figuring out very specific things. Like how much time should they be spending trying to get their head, like is the time, for every hour they spend on better understanding the power of AI, is that an hour that they're going to save in leveraging AI to do some of the important tasks they know they need to do? What's kind of a good mental model there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the one hard part to answer is, when do you know that you've productively spent your time versus, oh my gosh, I spent several hours trying to figure out how to get AI to do this thing that I might have been able to get done myself in less time.
Or even just like geeking out on non-actionable stuff anyway.
Right. Yes. So there is always going to be, I wouldn't worry that you're going to find yourself in that moment, because if you are using AI, you will find yourself in that moment. So what I would do is just simply be aware that you may cross into territory where you're being unproductive or burning time, so that you can get yourself back on track. But I would say that it is irresponsible for a company, especially a startup, to not have deep AI proficiency. And if they're just getting started and don't have a ton of skills, that's not an excuse not to get started. Like, more than ever, like, you really need to figure out how to start nailing use cases, because and I know this could sound like FUD to some people, but you literally will be further and further behind by not having that kind of proficiency. And there are low-hanging fruit opportunities that really aren't going to be a waste of time. And an easy way to do that is think about the tasks you have to do, that you dread doing, that even if you got B+ quality work back, the freeing of your schedule and the non-drain on your mental energy was totally worth it.
Yeah.
And like processing survey results is a perfect example of that. Being able to make sure you're using the discipline of recording your transcripts. Don't just rely on the auto summaries, because that's not good enough. Like, you want to be able to get a hold of the transcripts so you can interrogate them with the questions that you have. This is how I turn around proposals and things all the time now. What did I say that I was going to do in that conversation?
Yeah. For what it's worth, a couple weeks ago, Justin asked me to send him the recording so that he could do that. So.
Perfect.
Yeah, stuff that otherwise would have been like, I have to wait till I get a big enough chunk of time in my calendar to get to that. But now I can be like, I got 30 minutes. Not only is it produced, but it's very high quality.
Yeah. So quick follow-up question for you. So, obviously startups and like big established corporations have different advantages. Big established corporations a lot of times maybe have a channel advantage, where startups are more agile and innovative. Who do you think has a bigger advantage with AI right now in the short term to get the most out of it?
I know this may sound cliche, but startups.
That's what I think as well. That's why I asked. Yeah.
The reason is because motivation. So we've had at Copy Club, we've had not only individuals join, but we've had like founders sign up multiple people from their company in learning how to use AI. And what we have learned is that the more an employee is being told you got to go learn AI, like they just aren't. Even if you're showing them the lessons and showing them the stuff, because they're just not that motivated. They're like, they're like waiting for you to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And man, does that exemplify almost every employee at a large company.
Right. Yeah. And then how much do you think policy kind of has a fear that I'm going to do something wrong with AI, slowing down the bigger companies, where in startups it's kind of like, if I don't do anything, we die. Like you just, it's just a little more motivation.
It's 100% a factor, which is just that a lack of an AI policy, or an AI policy that has been delivered but didn't come with a balancing act of celebrating AI innovation. Because if you just are putting a policy in place, essentially what people are saying is, oh, they're trying to stop us from using it, I'm just going to stop using it because I don't want to violate the policy. But if you're not also showing great examples of how people are leveraging AI and showing that off, where it creates that social motivation, and you're going to stifle innovation. Plus, you just have a ton of people still who are in denial about the shift in their job. Like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen on various social networks where people are like, oh, product managers are, that role is now dead. And I love to troll back and say, engineers were just training data. So, the fact is, all of us, in whatever your individual contributor role is, you're going to have to morph into, no, I'm now the manager and director of that work. And it's much easier for startups who bring a lot of hustle, a lot of adaptability, multiple hat wearing. I'm okay and excited about my role changing. Whereas larger companies, an engineer who's like, my job is that I write the code, is going to be much slower. They're going to be like, well, I use the tab completion, or I use it for helping me find bugs. But I don't want to actually start changing the way that I go about developing, because, I'm a developer. I know what I'm doing. And those types of attitudes are just much more prevalent in large companies.
So when you think about, people looking to push growth in startups, like let's say, right now, I think most people in startups, they are using AI on some level, but they probably are making a lot of common mistakes. I guess, what are the two-part question? One is like, what are the big mistakes you see people making? And I guess if you said, look, you're here, and let's say 3 or 6 months down the road, you want to be here with AI, you want to be more proficient and better. Like, what are like the couple pieces of advice you would say, like do these things and you will be using AI more effectively in your job in this time frame?
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the mistakes. Some of them are talking to AI like a senior colleague,
Sure.
Not being specific. Like, those are some of the like early mistakes that people make. Then I'll also talk about sort of the progression that I've gone through as a way to sort of illustrate what I think is a general progressive model to aspire to. And that is, the first thing I started doing was leveraging the built-in UIs of the tools. So going to ChatGPT's actual website. My next progression was that I started using TypingMind. And TypingMind is a chat client that sits on top of the APIs for ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, and Perplexity, and others. And you can even use local LLMs. And so I could easily just model switch just through a little toggle in the upper left that allowed me to, if I wasn't satisfied with the results, if I tried a few times with the model, I could just switch the model. And then eventually, by model switching, it started to help me get a better sense of, who's good at what. And I like the way Ethan Mollick refers to it, it's like this jagged frontier where it's really hard to predict what things it's going to be really good at and what things it's really not good at, because we don't know what they've been trained on. And so the only way to get that knowledge right now is just time spent using it.
Yeah.
Plus, TypingMind has some additional proficiencies that you begin to really want. Like you can organize your chat's history into folders. You can have built-in prompt libraries. You can not only create something that looks like a custom GPT, but you can use that with Claude as the model or Gemini as the model, which has 2 million token context window. So that was sort of the next journey. Then I went into relevance AI, which is think like Zapier, but more narrowly specific to AI. So about creating prompt sequences. And that was really helpful for doing like standard operating procedures. So for example, anytime I now have work where I use the product market fit survey, I don't have one prompt that I use. I have a sequence of prompts that I use. So I can start with the results in the top, and then it will auto take it all the way through. And so then you start getting systems going, and you start going, wow, if I just have a system over here that's running the surveys and then send it over here and process the results, I can stay up to date, and I'm not actually doing a lot of that manual work. So you start getting into like the automation level. Then I think the emergent thing that happens is you start going, well, if I have all of these capabilities, like what's the best way for me to actually wield them? And that's when you start going, it's about personal betterment. And that's where I started to develop new skills. So I've been a product manager for over 10 years. And I've had some technical proficiency, creating my own HTML and CSS, and then getting into things like Tailwind, as a sort of CSS framework. But I've never been able to get into like JavaScript or databases or server side, functional code. And so then now I've made the leap. And so now, like many people, I'm building React front-end applications, and then I'm leveraging like Supabase as a open source alternative to Firebase. So I have a database, and I can create full-on functional applications because I was able to get AI to help me close that gap. And my latest awareness is, okay, 2025 is going to be the year that I really double down on productivity, because if I'm really leveraging this right, it is about time and getting all of my emails that are coming in, my commitments, the mapping of the breaking down of the work into tasks that have time associated with them that can then be time blocked on a calendar. And how do I get all of that dialed so that I am not time constrained anymore, and it's effortless for me to have conversations where I can have commitments and promises and know that they're going to be fulfilled without me having to put a lot of energy into that. And then you can start saying, hey, now that I can use all this reasoning capability, I should be thinking about how can I use my financial position and the success and progress that I've made so far. Like, what am I not considering about how I could be leveraging that to get to, a point of financial freedom? And so you really start thinking about like a mindset shift through each of those progressions. Anyhow, I probably went way farther than you were asking.
But I actually like that you went down that path, because I feel like what you laid out is a lot of steps to keep peeling back the onion and getting better at this. Yeah. What I'll kind of complement that with is something you've touched on already, but I think there's a lot of people that are intimidated by this. And what has moved me in the last 6 months from being pretty intimidated by it to spending 10 to 20 hours a week in ChatGPT now. It's just like everything I'm doing is driven by that. And so I like Nuriel's hooked model as kind of a good framework to building a habit. And if you want to build the habit of getting better and better at AI for me, it's mostly ChatGPT, but obviously there's a lot of different ways you can apply AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think about Muriel's hooked model, it starts with a trigger, and for me, the trigger is always curiosity.
Yes.
I just I'll wake up and go, I wonder what ChatGPT would come back with if I did this.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's like I had yesterday on intro.co, I have I do like one-on-one consulting, and someone sent a question to me, and like, of course, the best thing would be to read a blog post about that question to kind of get my mind thinking about it ahead of time. But now I can essentially write a crappy blog post with ChatGPT that essentially I'm just using voice back and forth to write that. And then, first time it was just sort of like, I wonder what it's going to say, but then it kind of gets me, oh, I disagree with this. I agree with this. It becomes kind of a sparring partner to flesh out an idea. And so now when I get into a call, I'm way more just kind of baked in my thinking on it. But I think if you take the full model of the hook model, it ends with the last step being investment. And essentially every time that curiosity leads you to a breakthrough in another way I can use AI, then you keep investing in strengthening your abilities. And that's why I like that you went all the way to really advanced use cases. But I think there's so much value in just the basic use cases that are out there right now.
Oh man, for sure. And that's one of the things I do is tell people, don't think, because all of the imagery you see of AI is always showing a robot, which I understand. But I'm like, you have to think about it as an exoskeleton. It is about the amplification of your skills. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who I'm a big fan of, Ethan Mollick, refers to it as co-intelligence. And that's when you get that flywheel effect, really, mm-hmm. like you're describing with the hooked framework. It's addicting and and amazing.
And so it's like with anything else, it's just like take that first step, and that first step is just try things.
Yeah.
And as you try things, you get that kind of like, wow, that's unexpected. And one of the big things with the hook model is it's a variable reward, and that variable reward is what a crappy result that came back, or oh my God, that just blew my mind. Yeah. That is what makes it pretty fun, is that it's a little unpredictable about what you're going to get back. What were you going to say, Ethan?
I was just going to say, like, I think it also helps if you have somebody to kind of bounce ideas. Like, we joked about it, but Sean and I are constantly kind of hitting each other up with, I did this with AI and look what it did, or I tried this, or I wonder if, so I just before this, somebody, I wish I could give the person credit for, but somebody said, hey, I've read this book, and this guy was talking about this approach where when you're prompting AI, use this approach of context, role, and action. And set up the context, tell it its role in helping you, and then tell it what action it. And I don't know how effective. I mean, it sounds like it could be pretty effective based on our conversation with context libraries and things like that. But I send that to Sean, and I'm like, I'm going to try this. And then he comes back and he'll say, I tried this, or I did this. And that, I think, I personally think that the mistake with AI is to just look at it like just get too stuck in front of your own computer instead of talking about it. And like the more I interrogate it in the context of with other people, the more value I get out of it. I think that's been super helpful for me.
I'm glad you said that, because for me, that really started with my business partner, Jason Glaspie, who originally the way we started working together was I was doing CopySub, and I got inundated with work, and I needed somebody who I knew was a good writer and I had trusted and was longtime friends with, and brought him in. And I was like, I don't know how to train you, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you my chat messages and how I'm doing what I'm doing. And then that started exactly the dynamic that you're talking about of going back and forth, showing each other. And then Copy Club led to like even more people. And so now I have like really good quality text message threads that are extremely high signal of sharing. And it really is about having other people that you can learn from and that you can show what you're doing and kind of get that reaction of like, wow, that's impressive, or that's really dumb. And getting that feedback sort of on what you're doing is a key part of that addiction.
So for the Copy Club site, is it subscription, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a paid membership community. And in it, we have tutorials that we teach. We have a whole resource library, things that you'd expect, like prompt libraries, and then a bunch of how-tos. And then a chance to be able to like interact with other members in the forum space. And then an additional thing that we have is what we call quests. And that's where you go say, hey, we want to build something that helps us solve a problem. And several other people like, I want that too. And so you sort of collaborate together and build. But then it also just becomes like friendships than things.
Yeah, I think especially that collaboration piece, when you put everything that you've figured out in there, and it's almost like the benefit of open source that now you've raised the starting point for a lot of people who are continuing to push the envelope, who can then report back on cool things they're figuring it out. That's really neat. I'm definitely going to check it out.
It reminds me also one thing that you said, which we talk to our members about a lot, which is one of the best reactions you can have is to when you start prompting is that output is terrible. And the reason that's one of the best is because you go, great, say all of the reasons out loud why it's terrible. That's your follow-up prompt.
Right.
Right.
And, just kind of getting people to make that connection of like, you not liking it is not the same as it's not good.
Yeah.
That's what you needed to clarify in order to get something closer to good. So that's a positive reaction.
The funniest thing that happened to me just this week, I was listening to Lenny's podcast, and there was a guest on there talking about there's architects, there's optimizers, and there's innovators, and those are kind of in every role in a startup at different stages. You've got the architect who builds the initial, and then you kind of work toward the scaler ultimately.
Yeah.
And I felt like in the interview he had referenced someone else had come up with that framework. So then I put into ChatGPT, who came up with the framework of this? And they said, Sean Ellis came up with the framework. I'm like, no way. And so I'm like, no, I did not. Who else might have come up in it? But I had to basically go, I've like trained it so much that like blowing so much smoke up my own ass, I guess, that I had to basically go through a incognito browser and ask, who came up with, and then it told me Ben Horowitz came up with it. But it is interesting how it's just like, so much of it is, I think it has like an overestimation of the stuff that I personally have come up with just because I put my own name in there so much.
I think that could be because of the memory feature of ChatGPT. So you made the right call of going to incognito mode.
Yeah. So Ethan, anything else before we wrap up here?
No, I know we're up against a hard stop. So this has been great, Justin. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, I love talking about this stuff and really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, really fun having you on. Probably my biggest takeaway is that there's always another layer of that onion to peel back, and just get in there and start figuring it out, and don't be intimidated by it. Be driven by curiosity, and it's fun, and it's way less technical than it is just iterative. Like I think if you're worried I'm not technical enough for it, you're kind of missing out. It's that just kind of like iterate, and a good growth person, that's sort of how they're wired anyway. So hopefully that's encouragement for people to dive in who haven't already.
Yeah, and I just love, it's all about specificity and context. And I almost tripped over a word there again, Sean. Specificity and context, but really like and you've mentioned this to me before, Justin, but like talk to it not like a senior colleague, but like a fresh out of school college grad. That doesn't mean talk to it like it's dumb.
Right.
Talk about it like it doesn't know. Like, I mean, the biggest thing, one of the things that's really helped me is you're like, Ethan, ChatGPT doesn't know what good means. You've got to tell it what good means to you, and that will help it help you. And like that kind of thinking, like, again, specificity and context.
So actually, one last question, Justin. When it makes a mistake, and you know the answer, is it helpful to say, that's actually the wrong answer, this is the right answer, or does that not really help it?
I mean, it can in the context of your one chat thread, but then it won't be part of its training data because that's a completely separate activity that's extremely expensive. So knowing that it's going to make that mistake again if you have a brand new thread or not using the memory.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Justin, so much. And for everyone tuning in, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Breakout Growth Podcast. Please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're at it, subscribe so you never miss a show. Until next week.